I'll never forget the look on Susan Henderson's face when she used her HOA master key to break into my house. She froze in my doorway, the key still dangling from the lock. Her mouth open in horror as she spotted two uniformed police officers sitting comfortably on my sofa. Officer Davis glanced up from his coffee and said in the calmest voice imaginable, "Well, well, right on schedule." Susan's eyes went wide as dinner. Plates. Her clipboard slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. She stumbled backward, tripped over my welcome mat, and landed face first in my potted geraniums. Let me back up to weeks and explain how we got here. My name is Michael Sterling, and I've just moved into my new home at 8214 Oakwood Lane in the Pinehurst Meadows subdivision. After 30 years as a corporate accountant and an early retirement, I was ready for quiet mornings with crossword puzzles and lazy afternoon naps. The house was perfect, a modest ranch-style home with blue shutters and a tidy little garden out front. What could possibly go wrong in such a peaceful neighborhood? Enter Susan Henderson, HOA President Extraordinaire. She wore her authority like a general's uniform, complete with a laminated badge that read President Henderson in bold letters. She showed up 3 days after I moved in, clutching a clipboard like a weapon and wearing a blazer so stiff it could probably stand up by itself. "Mr. Sterling," she announced without so much as a greeting. "I noticed you haven't submitted your landscaping approval forms." I explained I hadn't changed anything yet. She pursed her lips and made a note. "Pre-existing conditions still require documentation. Also, your mailbox is 0.7 inches too tall." From that day forward, Susan made it her personal crusade to uncover violations on my property. She measured my grass with an actual ruler. She complained that my garden hose was coiled counterclockwise instead of clockwise. She even tried citing me for curtains that were, according to her, to beige, creating an aesthetically disruptive neutral zone. When I politely refused to replace them, she glared and hissed. "We'll see about that, Mr. Sterling. The HOA has ways of dealing with troublemakers." The harassment escalated quickly. Susan began parking across the street for hours, taking photos through a telephoto lens. At HOA meetings, she spread rumors that suspicious deliveries were arriving at my house. The suspicious delivery being a new microwave from Best Buy. She told neighbors I was running an illegal business because she once saw me carrying a laptop bag. She even complained that the font on my house numbers was aggressively modern. Things worsened when I installed a bird feeder in my backyard. Susan appeared at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, pounding on my door and yelling about unauthorized wildlife attractants. When I pointed out that bird feeders weren't listed anywhere in the bylaws, she scribbled furiously on her clipboard and declared, "They are now." Emergency amendment passed last night. That's when I knew I had to act. I installed security cameras around my property, visible, legal, and properly positioned. Susan hated that. The following week, she started telling neighbors I was spying on them and called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss what she dubbed the surveillance situation at 8214 Oakwood Lane. I attended calmly, explaining that the cameras covered only my property for security. Susan's face turned crimson as she ranted about privacy concerns until 78-year-old Martha Lewis raised her hand and said, "Susan, didn't you install cameras on the community mailbox last year to catch people not closing it properly?" The room went silent. Susan's mouth opened and closed like a startled goldfish. After that meeting, I knew retaliation was coming. What I didn't expect was just how far she'd go. I began noticing subtle changes around my property. Trash cans slightly moved, small items shifted, signs that someone had been there when I wasn't looking. My doormat would be askew. Then one afternoon, I came home to find my back gate swinging wide open. Nothing was missing, but it was obvious someone had been in my yard. I filed a police report for trespassing and showed the officers my security footage. Though the image wasn't clear enough for a positive ID, The figure in the grainy video wore what looked suspiciously like Susan's signature stiff blazer. Officer Davis, the one handling my case, sighed as he watched the recording. "We've had complaints about this HOA president before," he said, his voice edged with disbelief. "She seems to think those master keys give her carte blanche to enter any property she wants." He explained that HOA master keys were intended for real emergencies, fires, floods, not for neighborhood snooping. He advised me to replace my locks and handed me his card. "Call me directly if this escalates." I had no idea I'd be using that card sooner than I thought. The very next day, my cameras caught Susan trying to peer through my windows with a pair of binoculars. When I confronted her, she claimed she was performing a routine exterior inspection for compliance. I told her to get off my property immediately. She scowled, muttered something about Phase 2, and stomped away. I didn't know what Phase 2 was, but I knew I was about to find out. I called Officer Davis to update him. He promised extra patrols in the neighborhood and told me to document everything. That's when an idea struck. If Susan wanted to escalate, I'd be ready. For the next few days, I staged a routine. Every morning at exactly 8 a.m., I'd pull out of my driveway as if leaving for work, then loop around the corner, park, and sneak back in through the alley. I'd wait quietly inside, cameras recording, coffee in hand. On the third morning, my patience paid off. At precisely 8:45 a.m., I heard the sound of a key turning in my front door. I had already called Officer Davis earlier to brief him on the plan. He and Officer Miller had arrived through my back door at 8:30 a.m. and were sitting in my living room, sipping coffee and eating donuts I'd picked up from the bakery down the street. We all turned toward the entryway as the front door creaked open. Susan stepped inside, clutching her clipboard and a measuring tape. She was so absorbed in her inspection that she didn't notice us at first. Muttering to herself, she said something about verifying interior violations and unauthorized modifications. Then she looked up and froze. The color drained from her face. Her clipboard hit the floor, papers scattering across the hardwood. Officer Davis stood and spoke in a firm, deliberate tone. "Susan Henderson, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and violation of state penal code." Susan's knees buckled. She collapsed onto my rug, stammering about HOA authority and emergency inspections. Officer Miller shook his head. "Ma'am," he said dryly, "wanting to measure someone's curtains is not an emergency." As they cuffed her, Susan kept insisting she had every right to enter any home within the HOA. She waved her master key as though it were a badge of power. Officer Davis calmly explained, "HOA rules don't override actual law. You can't break into someone's house because you don't like their mailbox." Height. Her face flushed from red to purple as reality hit. She began rambling about her reputation and her real estate license, but it was over. The entire arrest was caught on my interior cameras. Within hours, word spread across Pinehurst Meadows. My doorbell rang nonstop as neighbors stopped by to thank me. Apparently, Susan had been terrorizing the subdivision for years, but no one had ever caught her red-handed. Martha Lewis arrived with a warm apple pie and a triumphant smile. "I've waited 5 years for someone to stand up to that woman," she said. The next HOA meeting was the most attended in neighborhood history. Without Susan's iron grip, people finally felt free to speak. Story after story poured out, how she'd entered homes to measure furniture placement, rifled through mail to check for unapproved subscriptions, and even crept into backyards at night to count decorative stones. The board voted unanimously to remove her from office and to replace every HOA lock. 2 months later, Susan's court date arrived. I testified about the harassment and the break-in, submitting my footage and reports. Several neighbors followed with their own testimonies. Susan's lawyer argued she believed she was acting within her authority, but the judge wasn't buying it. "Mrs. Henderson," the judge said sternly, Being an HOA president doesn't make you law enforcement. It doesn't give you the right to violate privacy or enter homes without consent. Susan was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and $5,000 in fines. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. As the sentence was read, Susan's face crumpled. She turned toward me, tears streaming, and whispered, "I was only trying to maintain property values." The judge's reply was cool and final. "The only value you've ruined here, Mrs. Henderson, is your own." If you enjoyed hearing about a nosy HOA president getting exactly what she deserves, make sure to like this video and subscribe to HOA Conflicts for more stories like this.